but we are talking about the justice systems in our respective countries. Now, concerning the 2 permanent seats on the United Nations Security Council, I think here in Africa, we all know the importance and the urgency of having these 2 seats. And we have to seize this opportunity because we are actually at the end of 2024. And so we have to act very fast in 2025. And this should be the mantra of the African Union in 2025. And so, of course, we have to make sure that we can actually speak with one voice on the choice of who will represent Africa on the United Nations Security Council. It's not going to be easy. It will be up to the heads of states to decide who will be the continent's representative. And now we'll conclude to say that, like this morning, I read in the newspapers the problem between Ethiopia and Somalia, and this was being resolved by Turkey. The mediator is Turkey. Let us be responsible. Let us be serious. The African Union should be that person doing the mediation. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, candidate from Madagascar. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the end of our 2nd round. And without any transition, we are going to step into the 3rd round, and we are going to discover the question. Anita, you have the floor.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, we move into the 3rd round. Once again, if you're just joining us, these questions have been formulated by an independent panel, and the questions will be open and seen only at the beginning of the round, as I'm doing right now. Esteemed candidates, on the topic of reviving Pan-Africanism and countering external influence, Pan-Africanism is declining, and external powers and internal divisions challenge Africa's integration efforts. What specific steps will you take to rekindle the spirit of Pan-Africanism, counter big power politics on the continent, mobilize African countries behind a common integration agenda, ensure resource self-reliance, and position regional economic communities at the center of this process?
Chers candidats,
Distinguished candidates, your question is as follows in French.
L'africanisme est en déclin et les puissances extérieures et les divisions internes remettent en cause les efforts d'intégration en Afrique. Quelles mesures spécifiques comptez-vous prendre pour raviver l'esprit du panafricanisme contre la politique des grandes puissances sur le continent, mobiliser les pays africains derrière un programme d'intégration commun, assurer l'autonomie en matière de ressources et positionner également les communautés économiques régionales au centre de ce processus? Et nous allons commencer tout de suite avec le candidat.
And we will start with the candidate of Djibouti to provide his answer. You have 4 minutes. First and foremost, we have to understand that we are living in a world which is multipolarized world. This is a world that is actually have the right economies, the military strength, the capacity that is required, and how is Africa going to stand out if we do not represent much in terms of global trade? You cannot actually sit around a table where decisions are being taken for the destiny of the world. And so integration is, I would say, an obligation, is a must. When we talk about obligation, it is the G20 next year. And so it is important that the African Union Commission should be working hand in hand with the African Union to actually make sure that Agenda 2063 is a priority item on the agenda of Agenda 2063 of the G20. Africa has to be also on the UN Security Council. Just imagine 80% of the issues discussed at the UN Security Council is African problems. When we talk security issues, who do we talk about? Africa. When we talk about food insecurity, we also hear Africa, Zimbabwe, Botswana, Ethiopia, Kenya, Somalia. They have actually been victims of natural disasters. But the African Union should also be fully involved in the COP discussions. The COP discussions should also be held here in Africa. So a strong Africa has to be an Africa that is present on the global stage. We have to see that Africa has to be part and parcel of the global south, and this is what we have to do. And I'm going to make sure that our commission is going to work to ensure that Africa is part of the global south. Integration is a long-winded effort. It goes through solidarity. We are not working among ourselves. We are not speaking to one another as neighbors. We'd rather trade with non-African countries because we have non-tariff barriers, because our currencies are not convertible. Our currencies are not convertible. If I want to trade in birr with Ethiopia and Ethiopia wants to trade in francs, definitely there is loss of money. So we should have a payment and compensation system in Africa. We have to mobilize resources between 5 and 10 billion so that this compensation system is functional. Are we going to have a single currency in Africa? Why not? That is possible.
Daughter Excellency Randia Mandrato, it's your turn, sir. 4 minutes.
Je ne pense pas.
Well, I do not think that Pan-Africanism is actually dying out. No, because Pan-Africanism is in us. We are Pan-Africanists. You cannot erase the history of this continent, the history which also includes the efforts of our diaspora. So Pan-Africanism is really not dying in Africa. It is true that we all have a huge responsibility. The current generation that we have to work to make sure that the future generation should not forget what our founding fathers actually had in mind when they were establishing the OAU, so that all those who are in Africa should continue to live the same dream the same dream. We inherited this continent from our founding fathers, and we have the Africa that we want. The Africa that we see is the Africa where we live in, and the Africa that we want is the Africa that we want to prepare and which we must prepare. And so there is a clear difference between the Africa in which we are and the African Union, which is our own home, the common house. And if the African Union Commission does not put in the right resources, the human resources and the financial resources, even the diplomats and the military, we will not get to where we want to be. And so I am of the opinion that it all depends on the will of the people to go beyond the challenges that we face today. We all know the problems of our African Union today. There are certain aspects that do not meet the expectations of the people. For example, the SACA audit that was prepared by experts proposing reforms that have to be undertaken. We also have reforms that were undertaken in 2016. So we need to undertake those reforms to ensure that the African Union can actually rise to the challenges. The regional economic communities also have a role to play. I went to the COMESA for several years and actually saw the efforts undertaken by countries of COMESA and East Africa, and we see Tunisia, Egypt in COMESA as well, and this will continue. We have the Abuja Treaty actually defined gradual integration at the regional level and then continental level, and I know we will get there, and I am going to work with the members of the next commission so that together we can actually make all of this easy. And lastly, I think we should also bear in mind, we should also think about the military bases, the foreign military bases in Africa, in African countries.
Labor. Secondly, cheap raw material. The raw materials which they were actually getting originally from Africa. And that is how China has managed to develop a 600 million people middle class. Africa can be able to fill the gap which is being left down there by China by actually coming together and opening up. So we need to come together as Africa and create an African market which will be able to attract investors to come to our continent. Africa is the youngest continent in terms of population. 70% of our population is below the age of 35. That is a big bonus. They become a drug to society, drunkards, drug addicts, and criminals. But empowered, they become a real source for skills. They become a drug to society, drunkards, drug addicts, and criminals. But empowered, they become a real source for wealth creation. It is a pity today that many African youths drown in the Mediterranean trying to seek greener pastures in Europe because you have not created, using the artificial intelligence and information technology, we can be able to give this youth opportunity to work anywhere in the world when they're staying here on the continent. This is something that we are going to address, empowerment of the African youth, and together with the African woman, so that we create a workforce that will be helped in terms of wealth creation on the continent. This will enable Africa to leapfrog and to catch up with the rest of the world. I'm saying that I want to be a vehicle to be used to help Africa to get there. We will work together with all the leadership in the continent so that Africa moves.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Thank you very much, Your Excellency Raila Odinga, finishing us on the third round. And now we move into the fourth and final round, and I give my sister the opportunity to open the envelope and tell us what the first or the last question rather is. And ladies and gentlemen, as a form of a reminder, after this we have a quick break, and after the break each of our esteemed candidates will have 2 minutes to share their closing remarks. Fatima?
Dear candidates, your question is this one. The implementation of the key reforms at the African Union that were decided by the Assembly of Heads of State and Government has come to a standstill, and which has a negative impact on the structural stability and the financial viability of the Union, and also on the lack of the African Union to have an impact. Were you to become the chairperson, what new approaches would you adopt to reinvigorate the implementation of these reforms, rationalize the programs of the African Union, and strengthen its effectiveness in the long term?
Under the topic of implementing of reforms agreed under the Assembly Decision 635, the implementation of key African Union reforms decided by the Assembly of Heads of States and Governments has stalled, with an adverse impact on its structural viability and financial sustainability, and the AU's focus on a few high-impact public goods. If you become chairperson, what new approaches will you introduce to reinvigorate the implementation of these reforms, streamline the AU's agenda, and strengthen its long-term effectiveness?
Et j'invite à présent le candidat.
I'd like to invite the candidate from Madagascar to respond first. First of all, we have to begin by bringing back order to our shared home, the African Union. I think this is the highest priority. The mandate of the chairperson of the commission as a whole is last 4 years. So that is a very short period of time to be able to change from top to bottom what needs to be changed in terms of institutional reforms of the African Union. So one must begin by bringing back order. I did mention a short while ago the recommendations of the SACA audit. I also mentioned the reforms that have already been proposed in 2016. There would be other reforms. What needs to be done were I to become the chairperson of the union would be to review the documents, and one cannot forget history. One cannot ignore history. I don't think we could. We are at the end of a process. We are at the beginning of a new process, and the outgoing team did what they were able to do with the resources that they had at their disposal. And I would like to thank the outgoing chairperson of the commission, Mr. Faki, and his entire team. And were I to be elected chairperson of the commission, I would work, of course, with the chairperson, because it will be a lady chairperson. Now, these reforms have to be prioritized. There are reforms at the level of the financing of the African Union. There are reforms in terms of mobilization of strategic partnerships. There are, of course, issues that have to do with the effectiveness in the area of peace and security. So we have to prioritize the reforms. Yet, once again, 4 years is too short a period of time. It is therefore important to review objective by objective. Strategic objective is what I mean of the 10-year plan 2024-2032. And since it was my responsibility in COMESA, one can perhaps plan for strategic planning over perhaps 2-3 years, which strategic planning would make it possible for us to identify the urgent issues and to align the financing of these issues. The 10-year plan does not allow one to do this, and maybe were we to have a strategic plan, we could perhaps be more specific and address the matters that need to be addressed urgently in the way of reforms. And I also think, as I said a short while ago, that the organs of the African Union, beginning with the Conference of Heads of State and Government, but also the committee of the PRC, the Permanent Representatives Committee, with the Pan-African Parliament and the other organs, all the organs of the African Union, should agree on the speed they should work at, so that at the end of the day the reforms become visible, become tangible, and that the citizens of the continent can appreciate the effectiveness of a new of the new African Union led by a new team. Thank you.
And now I yield the microphone to you, Excellency Raila Odinga. 4 minutes, sir.
Well, we know where we are as African Union, and that's why the heads of state came up with that committee on reforms, which was headed by former president, current Rwanda President Kagame. The chairmanship has now been passed over to Honorable William Ruto, President of Kenya. I have had long discussions with President Kagame when he was chairing that committee, because I was working as a high representative of the AU on issues of infrastructure. And I know the kind of frustrations that you feel working that way. I know that 93% of the resolutions that are passed by the heads of state at the assembly are never implemented. Now, there's some of them are resolutions which were probably not necessary. Some of them are not implementable, but majority of them are just not implemented. Some have to do with the structure and management of the AU at the headquarters. I'm not trying to pass any judgment here because I know that Mr. Paki has worked very hard to try to make the organization move forward. The other one has been the issue of funding, which has been a major challenge, and look at other alternative sources of funding. When I was there as high rep on infrastructure development, we came up with a proposal to set up an infrastructure fund for Africa, and using the African resources, because many of African countries have got a lot of money in sovereign funds, from which the AU can actually borrow without having to pay so much high interest. And this will help AU actually to spearhead the process of constructing some of these infrastructures. I mentioned the Trans-African Railway Network, Lagos to Cairo in Mozambique, to Lobito in Angola, and Walvis Bay in Namibia. Then you have got the LAPSET, which will come from Lamu in Kenya, running through South Sudan, Central Africa to Crib in Cameroon, to create a land bridge that opens the interior of Africa and gives these landlocked countries in the continent access to the sea. So some of these are possible, but we need to think out of the box and ensure that most of these reforms which are being proposed are implemented. We were talking about energy, which is a very major issue. And we have got the Grand Inga in the Congo, which can actually power the entire continent with power pools, southern power pool, eastern power pool, central, western, and northern power pool. That will help us to lower the cost of energy in the continent. That would be a revolutionary change on the continent. Then you've got the connectivity, fiber optic connectivity, open skies, opening up the skies for movement of people, and then visas. To do visas is a big issue. Many African businessmen cannot travel across the continent without, because they don't have visas.
Excellency, I'm really sorry to interrupt you. Les 4 minutes se sont écoulées. Nous allons maintenant suivre.
We are going now to listen to the response from the last candidate for this round, the candidate from Djibouti.
Let me start by paying tribute to our heads of states who have endorsed those reforms in 2017. And then the champion for those reforms was His Excellency President Kagame, and he passed the responsibility to President Ruto. Now, there are a number of reforms that have already been implemented. We have to recognize that. The size of the commission, we had 10 commissioners, chairperson, deputy chairperson, and 8 commissioners, and it has been reduced. We have what we call a golden rule in terms of managing the staff and the personnel. I'm still waiting for the SACA program to be implemented. I hope that this hot potato will not wait for us, one of us, when we'll be elected. But I hope that the SACA process will be implemented. It is about the personnel, the staff. We have moved from a lot of short contract employees to a permanent contract. That's very important. If you want to create loyalty, you want to create the ownership within your staff and personnel, you have to make them happy. They need to have a permanent contract, and it is in the SACA program. Now, the biggest bottleneck of the reforms is the financing. Our heads of state said we will pay 0.2% of eligible import to the Commission. Only 17 countries, 17, are applying and abiding by that rule. It has to change. I'm not going to impose that on our leaders. It's not my intention, but I will advocate for it. It's very important to have, that particular issue of mobilizing and fostering financing be resolved immediately. Then, our experts, there is a unit in the African Union Commission called the Reform Unit, led by Mr. Makoko, a very able African expert. But there are so many reforms that have not been implemented. One of them is PAP, the Pan-African Parliament. It's still a consultative organ. When is the Pan-African Parliament will become a legislative organ? They have passed in 2014 a protocol. Only 15 countries ratified that protocol. And this is one of the major reforms that we have to implement. Then we have on the judicial sector, the Court of Justice, the Commission of Human Rights. Sometimes they are fighting on issues. The Court of Justice do not open its doors to nationals, to African citizens, to NGOs. They are complaining. I am hearing complaints about the African citizens with regard to the Court of Justice. And then they are fighting who is doing what, the Commission of Human Rights. These reforms have to be implemented. And the Bureau of Liaison, a liaison bureau. We have so many on the continent. That's double use of those bureaus. Time is running, time is flying. So we have to rationalize. How can you imagine that you have 3 bureaus in the same region? And we're saying we should have the golden rules for management. And whenever we want to touch one of the bureaus, it's a political matter. It's useless, but it is a political matter. The country that is hosting the bureau is saying, you won't touch it. It has to change. It needs leadership. It needs understanding, negotiation, but it has to change. If you want to change things, we have to be frank and outspoken. We have to be, really tough when it comes to be tough, and lean when it comes to we have to do it. We have to do it.
Yes, sir, your time is up. And now, ladies and gentlemen, that brings us to the end of round 4. If you are just joining us, we've had 4 rounds, and each of them has touched on a thematic area. And now we will go for a quick break. When we come back, the candidates each have 2 minutes to share their closing remarks.
Mesdames et messieurs, nous remercions bien.
Ladies and gentlemen, we'd like to thank our dear candidates for having responded to the last question of the 4th round of this Mjadala Africa Leadership Debate of the African Union. Thank you very much for staying with us. We'll come back in a few minutes. We're going to take another short break. And after the break, each candidate will have 2 minutes to make their closing remarks. See you in a short while.
A man of the people, a mobilizer par excellence, a nationalist, patriot to the core, selfless leader, a peacemaker, and a lifelong Pan-Africanist. Kenya's former cabinet minister and Prime Minister.
Mimi Raila Amolo Odinga.
The first African Union High Representative for Infrastructure Development from 2018 to 2023. Raila Amolo Odinga, with his profound leadership experience and diplomatic skills, demonstrates a keen understanding of Africa's challenges, embodies geopolitical awareness, and represents historical precedents through his commitment to consultative processes. His philosophy and experience make him the ideal candidate for the role of African Union Commission chairperson. His deep-rooted sense of African identity and commitment to Pan-Africanism are at the core of his political philosophy. His key focus and commitment are to harness Africa's rich and vast human and natural resources to command the global influence it rightfully warrants. He is an ardent champion of African unity, intra-African trade and integration. The Right Honourable Raila Odinga is a visionary, transformative and action-oriented leader who has consistently demonstrated admirable leadership qualities that will provide impetus in the actualization of Africa's priorities. This has been demonstrated through resource mobilization for the implementation of key infrastructure projects under the Programme for Infrastructure Development in Africa. As a global statesman, he has represented Kenya across the continent and the continent across the world. He has been a peace mediator and election observer, illustrating expertise and experience to serve internationally as an effective advocate for Africa. In his tenure as Prime Minister of Kenya, he oversaw the national budget and implementation of fiscal policies that enhanced transparency and efficiency in public spending. He introduced performance contracting in the government, significantly improving public service delivery. Honorable Raila Odinga's leadership roles have consistently involved managing and leading diverse teams across different cultural and political contexts. As AU High Representative for Infrastructure Development, he led a team of advisors from various African countries, fostering a collaborative environment that leveraged cultural and political diversities. He has a proven track record of championing the voices of the underprivileged, building consensus among stakeholders from diverse backgrounds, and ensuring that policies and projects reflect the collective aspirations of the African peoples. The Right Honourable Raila Odinga is committed to harnessing Africa's youth's potential and has championed the adoption of technology in various capacities throughout his career. His role at the African Union involved promoting the integration of digital solutions in infrastructure projects such as the Continental High-Speed Train and Smart City initiatives. To align Africa to Agenda 2063 and usher the continent into a new era of shared prosperity, there is no better leader other than the Right Honourable Raila Amolo Odinga.
Excellencies, I present to you a visionary Pan-African, a bold and a professional and technocrat, as well as a towering statesman and a veteran mobilizer for positive change. Kenya, his vision and his leadership.
The necessary so that AU can work more effectively. One of these reforms will be financial reforms, so that we are able to bring in the African private sector into the funding. I mentioned also the issue of sovereign funds that we can use. We can create a fund that will enable AU to do all its money work. Then there's issue of 0.2% of the duty, which only 17 countries are remitting. I will work to ensure that all the countries could pay their dues. This is what happens in the European Union, and that's why European Union is able to even fund African Union. It's a shame. We can be able to fund this organization out of our own resources on the continent, and this is what I'm going to try to do. And I said that I am ready on day one when I'm appointed. I will not need any kind of induction. I'm ready to work for the continent, and I will offer my best. The days of Africa have come. The African lion will begin to roar and tell its Asian tiger counterpart and the European bear and the American jaguar that this is going to be Africa's millennium. the 2000.
Dear candidate, I'm really sorry to interrupt you once again, but these are the rules of the debate. Nous allons maintenant, mesdames et
We are going now, ladies and gentlemen.
I will be up to your aspirations, and I will defend the interests of our continent, and I will work diligently to defend our continent, and with the full modesty.
Will be leading for 4 years. Will be leading the African Union Commission for 4 years, and there shall be 8 high-level public servants like most of us, and we shall be the ones to continue with reforms. We shall be a united team, a team that will have the team spirit to continue in the implementation of the 10-year plan of Agenda 2063. I do regret that this evening we're not able to handle subjects that are so urgent because we did not have enough time. Issues such as public health, the debt, issues of financing and financial institutions of the African Union, questions that have to do with the participation of the civil society and the diaspora, the questions that are linked to information and digital technology. I'm sorry we didn't have time to deal with those issues, but on we shall have other opportunities, and I shall be able to make my modest contribution. Like in public sport, there have to be players, and there have to be those who choose or who select the players. Those who select the heads of state. It is up to them to select the team that will lead the African Union Commission. For their need, we need a leader. Men and women need a leader, and I hope that in 2025, the wisdom of heads of state and government will balance the team that will win, so that the Africa that we want can continue to win the battle for sustainable development. Thank you. Thank you very much. Made by the different candidates.
Candidates, ladies and gentlemen, please, another round of applause for our esteemed candidates. Tonight, we have heard from His Excellency Mahmoud Ali Yusuf, Foreign Affairs Minister Djibouti. We've also heard from His Excellency Raila Amolo Odinga, former Prime Minister of Kenya. We've also heard from His Excellency Richard J. Randyamandrato, who is the former Foreign Affairs Minister of Madagascar. Each one of our candidates has done an exceptional job talking about the thematic areas that were set before them. We've talked about advancing economic integration. We've talked about promoting peace and security as well as democracy, Africa's place in global affairs, and reforming the African Union amongst many. Ladies and gentlemen, it's been an absolute honor bringing you Mjadala Africa Leadership Debate 2024.
Merci infiniment.
Thank you very much, Anisha. Ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of the Mjadala Leadership Debate, direct streamed line from the headquarters. Different candidates, all the very best. The election of the new chairperson will take place at the level of the African Union Commission. It will take place in February next year. And thank you to all of you for having been with us, and have a good evening.